It's Australia's jewel in the crown, a symbol representing the nation. But internally, the Opera House is facing allegations of systemic racism.
The reality is that inside the Black and First Nations and Brown and Asian people who work there are being driven to the bone and being driven out of the organisation.
Former publicist Justin Tam worked at the Opera House for 7 years, but quit last year after expressing concerns since 2018 about the lack of cultural diversity in senior levels of the organisation.
I couldn't work in an organisation that was unwilling to address the racism around it and the racism inside it. When I saw ethnically diverse people at the Opera House, they were working in low-paid cleaning positions, as ticketing staff, as tour guides, as ushers.
As a member of the communications team, Justin also became aware of complaints from the public about alleged racial profiling by Opera House security.
I saw a patron at the opera complaining that they were being profiled by security. I saw a young woman at a Zadie Smith talk being profiled by security because of what she dressed like. And she took to Twitter to talk about that later. I saw a young person at a Solange concert wearing a shirt that said "Destroy White Supremacy" be flagged as a security threat.
There should be no complaints. We need to do everything we can to make sure that there are no complaints. But yes, there were 7 complaints over the last 11 years. That is less than 1 complaint per year with 11 million people on site per year. And each of those complaints was because I looked at the records, and to see each of those complaints was fully investigated.
For Aboriginal artist Travis de Vries, landing a job at the Opera House was a dream. The 33-year-old began as a programming assistant, working his way up to associate producer between 2013 and 2018.
I felt like this is the pinnacle and this is super important, and it's the pinnacle of the arts in Australia almost.
But over time, he became disillusioned with the way the Opera House handled racial issues, eventually quitting.
I started dreading going into the Opera House, going to work, just because there was all of these things that added up.
Both Justin and Travis say there were other problems with Opera House security. They attended event briefings where they say hypothetical security threats were racialised.
It was like to get everyone in the room kind of immersed in the scenario a bit more, but it was like there was photos of an Aboriginal protest put up on the screen.
I remember going to one security briefing where a photo of a Middle Eastern person was put up, and it was a scenario that, you know, this could be a dangerous person on site.
Is it appropriate that those photos were shown?
I'm not aware of those situations.
Travis says he was also asked by security to intervene in crisis situations involving Aboriginal patrons.
I specifically asked because I'm a black fellow, and it was like, well, you're a black fellow, can you come and talk to this other black fella who is drunk? Because you will have you'll get a better outcome than we will.
There are many women and men in my life that influenced me. And when I did start...
Celebrated Aboriginal arts executive Rhoda Roberts was until recently the Opera House's inaugural Head of First Nations programming. She left on good terms, but says she too was asked to take on extra cultural duties on top of her existing job, including intervening in crisis situations with Aboriginal patrons.
I have had a security man ask, I don't know what to do with this gentleman, can you please help me? And of course, because he was hallucinating, he was having an episode.
Do you think it's appropriate that you should be asked to do that when you were head of First Nations programming?
Yes, but I think because he was at one of our events, and he was in absolute distress. I think had it been an 85-year-old white man and that security guy knew I was a registered nurse, I think he would have asked me the same thing.
Rhoda wants to see change at the Opera House.
I want to see excellence. I want to see capacity building and I want to see recognition, but I don't want people being put in situations where it's they're made to lose confidence.
A turning point for Travis was an event one night inside the Opera House in June 2016.
There was a trivia night for staff at the Opera House and also subcontractors. The way the Opera House works, there's quite a large number of staff, but there's also vendors within the Opera House.
The theme that year was Hollywood, and people dressed up as movie characters.
At this particular event, a person came dressed in blackface as Samuel L. Jackson from Pulp Fiction. And I remember a ripple throughout the crowd as people noticed. I'm kind of shaking now, remembering, but I got angrier and angrier. I think seeing that, a lot of it was just a complete disrespect.
Sitting next to Travis was his manager, Alison Naderbaum. The former Opera House veteran of 10 years remembers Travis and other staff being shaken that night.
From my perspective, I felt shocked and deeply sickened and offended. I found it repugnant. I was so angry I could barely get words out. And I said to this individual, what you are wearing is really offensive. Here's where the nearest bathroom is. You either need to go and remove the face paint and the wig, or you need to leave the event.
The man then removed the blackface and returned to the function. While the incident was reported to HR, both Travis and Alison say management should have sent a strong message against such behaviour to the rest of the organisation.
I do know about this incident. It was 5 years ago, as you said, Jason, in 2016. The people involved was a team from one of our contractors, because we like to involve all of our contractors in what we do to create this Opera House family. There were people in that team who came together, one of them in blackface, and within 5 minutes they were asked by a non-First Nations member of staff to wash their face and remove their wig, which they did. We reported the incident to the contractor immediately, and the contractor dealt with the issue, and that we no longer work with that contractor.
In a subsequent written statement to 7:30, the Opera House clarified that
the worker wearing blackface was an employee or guest of an employee of a food and beverage service provider at the Opera House.
It's no good that it happened. It's really good that it was called out, that it was dealt with so quickly.
In March this year, a group of people who have worked at the Opera House outlined their broad-ranging concerns in a joint statement on social media. The message has reverberated to the highest levels of the Opera House, the CEO writing to her senior leadership team about the need to understand how systemic racism is manifested at the Opera House. Staff have now been surveyed about their views on cultural diversity, with 200 members responding. And at an internal staff meeting, Chief Executive Louise Heron said she was taking action.
These are difficult conversations for everyone. I find them confronting and difficult, and I'm sure that many of you do too, but they are so important.
Speaking to 7:30, Louise Heron revealed her plan to remove unconscious bias and elevate culturally diverse staff.
About a year ago, we started working on a diversity, inclusion and belonging strategy. And our vision for diversity, inclusion and belonging is that the Sydney Opera House, who we are and everything we do, reflects and respects the diversity of the community.
I understand that you wrote to the senior leadership team saying that it is very important that we understand how systemic racism is manifested here. How do you think that systemic racism manifests itself at the Opera House?
I was reflecting the words that were written in the statement, and I felt it was an appropriate acknowledgement that if people feel that there is systemic racism, I am appalled to think that there might be systemic racism at the Opera House. But we need to explore and dig into what that actually means.
So you say might be systemic racism, or is there systemic racism at the Opera House?
This is an area of deep feeling, and if some people feel there is systemic racism, then it is something that we must root out.
The Opera House has also made senior appointments from culturally diverse backgrounds, including in security and to deal with cultural issues.
This is such a difficult issue. It's certainly not appropriate that people are asked things that are outside of their job, and it is something, for example, that we've recently recruited a First Nations advisor, which is a dedicated role.
I think Louise Heron, being the sort of CEO she is, does listen and goes, okay, what can we do to adjust this?
The diversity of the community is changing, and we must continue to adapt. I mean, we have done quite a lot of work on this, but certainly there is a lot more to be done.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.